So the programs that we have are all called Nature Virtually Everywhere. We do webinars, and we do video public programs and school programs. And if you'd like to learn more about that, you can go to our website at caneforest.com and look at the environmental education tab. But today, it's all about witness trees. So here's a beautiful example of a witness tree. This is a really large and quite old bur oak that we have on the grounds of the Leroy Oaks Forest Preserve, which is where I have what I'll call my office. We have a nature center and a staff of naturalists that are located there doing all of our program planning, but we mainly like to be in the out of doors, looking at trees and other things in nature. When we talk about witness trees, a lot of people think that they have a real old tree in their backyard and wondered, is this a witness tree? Well, that term witness trees has a couple of different meanings. A lot of people think of them as trees that were present to witness early historical events, like the Civil War, for instance. Some of our trees, especially our oaks, can be a couple of 100 years old and could have been standing during the Civil War. But the witness trees that we're going to be focusing on today originate more from the second definition of witness trees. And those are trees that were spotted when the surveyors were out lining out the sections and the boundaries of Illinois before it became a state. So surveyors were sent out and they surveyed the land of Illinois so that it could be parceled out to private owners. And they used trees to mark the corners of these surveyed plots and section lines. And those are the trees that still stand today, some of them. I'm going to tell you about how you can find which of those trees are still standing and how you can even play a part in a citizen science project and record what you find if you want to go out into the field and find some of these trees that the surveyors in the 1820s to 1840s found in early day Illinois. So these witness trees, these old trees that were at the corners of surveyed land are important for a lot of different reasons. They're important historically because they were used to mark off the land and kind of as early indicators of where property lines began and ended for townships and later personal property. I think a lot of these witness trees are really old and big too, and they're important spiritually. There's been a lot of studies lately that show that getting out for a walk in nature is really good for us. It's good for us physically. It leads to decreases in weight and improved heart function and lung capacity, but also good for our mental health. Spending time in nature has been shown to lead to decreases in depression and anxiety, to increase our mental capabilities. Patients in hospitals that have a view of a window with trees have been shown to do better than those that don't have that type of a nature view. So this whole theme of nature RX and forest bathing, witness trees, these old big trees play a role in that. And lastly, ecologically, a lot of these witness trees were around and have been studied since the 1830s. They've gone through changes in climate and ecology, and we can learn from what they've experienced and how they've responded to these changes, especially as we're facing climate change. They can be used into the future as well to see how changes that we might enact on the landscape, how well they impact the trees and all of the other species that play a role in those habitats. If you just think about it though, like in your heart, what a witness tree means. A witness tree is an old tree. It's been around since the 1830s or so. And this saying kind of really sums it up. This is from the National Park Service. And it says that there's something about these gnarly old trees that captures the imagination. Just knowing that the living, breathing life form in front of you has stood witness to decades and centuries of history stirs the mind. You know, if we stand under a gigantic bur oak, like I showed on that first slide at Leroy Oaks Forest Preserve, you really wonder what that tree has seen in its lifetime. It's seen Native Americans on the land in many cases, if it's old enough. It's seen wars. It's seen, you know, new families come in if it's standing on private property. If it could talk, it would have so many great stories to tell. It's just nice to think about that, that constant that's been out there as a sentinel looking over the land. Now, if we go back and understand how these witness trees that played a part in marking section lines were first identified, we have to go back to the Illinois Public Land Surveys of the 1800s. So back in the early 1800s, the office of the U.S. Office of the Surveyor General, which existed at that time, and it was responsible for really mapping out all of the lands as the European settlers moved from the East Coast and started moving west and settling the land. It was the Surveyor General that sent surveyors out to map out the new territory and to get it ready for sale to the public and to incent private citizens to buy the property and start clearing the land and farming it. And they reached Illinois in the early 1800s. You can see one of the maps that those surveyors put together here in very early Illinois. This is one of the first maps from the 1800s. The surveyors, when they arrived, used tools, chains that were of a specified length to lay out a system of rectangular grids on the land. And they measured off these grids using their chains in very systematic fashion into a very regular grid. And that grid was called the Public Land Survey System. You hear the initials PLS or PLLS for this. So this is a particular grid of DuPage County. When the surveyors were out there with their chains and laying out these lines on the land, basically, they kept notebooks and they kept track of what they were seeing. So it wasn't totally quantitative. They weren't only looking at miles and putting together little squares on a map. Their notes indicated things about the landscape quality, things that they saw, the types of plants that they were experiencing in the landscape, things like mosquitoes that they encountered. So some of these notes in their journals are really interesting to read and tell us a lot about the ecology of Illinois before European settlers arrived en masse. Where possible, when the surveyors identified something at the corners of these grids that they laid out, they wanted to have something physical to mark that spot, and they chose a tree, a witness tree or bearing tree, they also referred to it as. And ideally, they would identify 3 or 4 bearing trees at the corners, one in each directional, line of the corner. So at the northeast, the southeast, and northwest, and the southwest. And they would also try to find a tree that lay at the midpoint of each of the grid lines between the corners. They'd record in their journal, they'd make a note of the tree's common name, the location, and they didn't have GPS coordinates then, and the size of the tree. So they would measure the circumference of the tree and calculate the diameter. I'm going to talk about how to do that if you want to go and find your own witness tree in a little bit. They also added some interesting notes that read as stories, like I mentioned, what was going on there in terms of the ecology of the land, what their experiences were. These were mainly young men, and it was a very difficult job. If you can imagine, Illinois in the 1800s was wild. It was a land of prairie and savannas, so not too much woodland, but there was some woodland along the rivers, especially on the east side of the rivers and streams. So it was difficult work, and their journals indicated that. They make for interesting reading. They also, if they came across a tree that they wanted to use as a marker of the grid corner or midpoint, they would try to mark it in some way. In addition to making a note of that tree in their journal, they'd use a couple of different techniques for marking it for other people coming by. They could blaze the tree, which is basically taking an axe and making a hatchet mark towards the bottom of the trunk, like this tree shows, and that blaze then has grown as the tree has grown. Or they would scribe the tree with some type of a charcoal mark or other type of a paint type of application. They also did the same type of exercise when they found the line trees, those that fell on the line. So maybe a tree was not at the midpoint of the line between the section corners, but it was somewhere on that line between corners. So that was the second best. So they located a lot of trees and they marked them as they could. In the field notes that I mentioned in their journals, so they're fascinating in some ways. They're handwritten, of course, because these men, and they were all men at that time, were out there with a paper journal and a little stub of a pencil, and they were recording their notes about the plant communities. So again, they were mainly in prairie and some woodlands, but also there was a lot of wet areas in Illinois. Illinois, even though it's called the prairie state, a lot of the prairie before settlement was wet. That's why a lot of the farmers that initially settled here and farmed the land used drain tiles to take the water off of their fields and make it farmable. So it was a very wet environment, and they were slogging through a lot of mud when they did these surveys. In their field notes, they also made note of not just the types of communities, the mass of different ecosystems that they were in, but the individual species that they found there, including the trees, the bearing trees or the witness trees. And a lot of these trees were oak trees. So the pre-settlement condition of Illinois really included lots of oaks, all types of oaks. In Illinois, we have bur oak, white oak, red oak, pin oak, multiple species of oak. And that was the predominant tree back then. It's a little bit endangered now. Our oaks are in decline, and we're doing all we can to save them. And when I get to in a little bit how you can find modern day witness trees, you'll see that it's all tied to restoring these oak communities. The undergrowth that the surveyors noted at the time, those lower level plants underneath the trees, interestingly enough, in the surveyors' notes were mostly hazelnut, which we don't see a lot of today. So some things have changed, and we can really learn a lot from reading these journals about the pre-settlement vegetation. And if we wanted to restore land, for instance, like the Forest Preserve we often do, we restore to pre-settlement conditions, we would be planting a lot of hazelnut bushes. This is a great wildlife bush, and it's a good human food too, for those of you who like hazelnuts, you know what I'm talking about. The journals included notes about what the major bodies of water were. So that would include in our area in Kane County, the Fox River and the tributaries of that river. Made note of the topography. We are in a morainal area here. There's a lot of glaciology, glacial features in Kane County, including moraines, cames, which are hills like Johnson's Mound, if you've ever been there. So they made note of those features as well as the types of soil. That was important for future farmers to read. If they were interested in a section of Kane County for farming, they'd want to know how rich the soil was. And these journals were a good source of that information. They also noted man-made features. There weren't too many at the time, but there were some mines and some dams on the water, and they made notes of those in their journals. The field notes were made by a crew. The surveyor crew typically consisted of the surveyor himself, the chain men. There was one at the front of the crew pulling these long chains, and one at the back. And they use those to measure the length of the section line and to mark the grid points. There was an axeman that would blaze the trees that were found. And then there were flagmen that would be way in front and kind of follow the flag as the group was advancing. So it would be a crew of folks on one surveying expedition. They also noted things about the soil quality, again, kind of related to the type of soil. So the field notes were then taken back to the office. So the notes were made in the field in their notebooks. Notebooks went back to the surveyor's office, and the surveyor's office constructed these township plat maps that showed general land usage. So you can see that this small section of, this is DuPage County here, showed a section of prairie, timber, and then Salt Creek flowing through it. And these numbers, 29, 30, 31, 32, those are the section numbers that were assigned to those squares of land. Here's a couple of examples. Some of the writing was really blunt in the surveyor's journal, and it really does reflect their experience out there in the wild as they were surveying the land, looking for these witness trees, and going about the job of sectioning Illinois into grids and into townships. The swamp was 20 to 30 chains long, nasty, vile place, full of mosquitoes. You saw a lot of reference to biting insects, a lot of water. Although there was some land that was partially dry and fit for cultivation, and part that was worse than good for nothing. So some very colorful language here. Due to the morainal conditions, beginning to ascend a handsome top of the ridge. So they were finding some beauty in their quest. And the land is a beautiful, level, rich prairie. So a lot of prairie, some of it was wet prairie, but that sea of prairie grass and forbs that you've heard described, these surveyors saw it when they came out in the 1820s. So the journals that the surveyors kept were interesting. They helped people who were coming to settle the land, but they were used after that for many purposes. And the data that was kept both in the grid assignments and in the journals has been used for many different purposes. The plat maps and the field notebooks have just a wealth of information about the landscape. The original maps and notebooks are available. The public can access them. They're housed in the Illinois State Archives, and those are accessible at some of the larger state universities. They're available on microfilm, also at some of these universities. And you can even get to the plat maps themselves, not the journals, by going to the Illinois Secretary of State's office online. And you can see some of the earlier maps of Illinois with those grids laid out on them there. The maps and the field notes were also used to create this land cover map of Illinois of the early 1800s. And the colors on this map show the pre-settlement communities and ecosystems that were here in Illinois before all the settlers arrived. And a lot of agencies that are restoring and managing land do aim to get their land back to the point that it was pre-settlement. That's kind of the target that they're going for. And these land maps are very important to those restoration and natural resource management teams that are doing so many of our conservation efforts here in King County and other counties as well. So the European settlement landscape can help those natural areas management decisions, but it also helps us, because here we're talking mainly about the witness trees. I just wanted to give you a little bit of a background as to how they were found originally. But let's talk a little bit more specifically about witness trees and how we can find the ones that remain today. So we owe a lot of our ability to find witness trees in modern day Illinois to the Chicago Region Tree Initiative. And that is a group that it's a consortium that has a vision of finding or making sure that the trees we have in the Chicago area are more healthy, abundant, and diverse, and equally distributed so they can provide benefits to the people and animals that live in the Chicago region. So the group is dedicated to this vision, and they have a lot of initiatives in place to help trees in the Chicago area. It's a partner agency through the Morton Arboretum and the Field Museum, as well as some other partners. One of the initiatives of the Chicago Region Tree Initiative is the Witness Tree of Illinois program. And through this program, they have used all types of modern tools, GPS and mapping and things like Google Maps to document the old trees in modern form on modern maps and show the public where those trees are as living witnesses to our natural heritage. And to recruit the public, and I'd like to encourage you during the rest of the talk today to visit these bearing and witness trees and play a role in the citizen science effort that Chicago Region Tree Initiative is spearheading, and feed into, are those witness trees still there? To go and find some on your own. I'll tell you about how I found a couple. And you just think about all the history that tree's been through and all of those other benefits that we talked about, going for a walk in the woods, and find a couple of these trees yourself. So the Chicago Region Tree Initiative has used a program called Arcgis. It's an information system that uses modern GPS coordinates to put together a map of where all of the witness trees are in Illinois. These are the historical locations of the witness trees. And they've done this by looking at the journals and those old plat maps that the surveyors put together. So they found where those trees were, and they've GPS located them and put them on an interactive digital modern map. And this map can be found at the URL here. It's managed by the Field Museum. And it shows a map similar to what you see here. So you can see all of these dots on the map mark an individual witness tree. And it's no surprise that the trees lay on a grid pattern, because as I explained, those bearing trees, the surveyors found were at the corners of the grid lines or on the lines that connect at the corners. So they're going to be in little squares, exactly how they look here. So that map is online. You don't need to sign up for it. You don't need to register. You can just navigate there and get into the map and see where these trees are. Then you can determine that you're going to go and visit a tree. Let me go back just a second, though. There's one more thing I'm going to explain. So as you're looking at this map, it says Chicago wilderness areas in there. So that includes Chicago itself, as well as all the collar counties around Chicago. There is a legend on the left. So you can see there it says Illinois witness trees. You can see that each of the tree species have a different color. So the map is color coded. And you'll notice that most of the little spots are brown, which is oak. And no surprise there, because most of the witness trees were oak, which is why the Witness Tree Program, as part of the Chicago Region Tree Initiative, is really one of its objectives is to help oak trees. Okay, so you can see most are oak, but there's a spattering of all of these other species too: ash, elm, hickory, linden, maple. So you'll find them all. And if you decide, I would like to go and see if I can find one of those trees, see where it was located back in the early 1800s, and see if that tree is still standing, because that's the goal. We're not sure. That map was created with the journal and the old maps, but the Chicago Region Tree Initiative did not verify that all those trees were still standing. But that's where we come in the public as a citizen science project. So you can look at that map of the bearing trees and find a spot that you'd like to go and investigate and settle on a target tree that you'd want to go check out. That tree can either be on your own property. Some people have found them on their property. Those lines went through, the entire county, so it's possible. Or you can go to a public property, something like a forest preserve, which is where I went. If it's on someone else's property, you'll need to ask for permission, of course. But in a forest preserve or a state park or a county park, you can certainly go in and investigate a tree. You'll need some type, the only tool that you'll really need is some type of a navigation app on your phone. These are very easy to find these days. You'll want one that has the ability to record GPS coordinates. It has a compass. Be nice if it had some satellite maps so that you could look at the terrain that you were going to be walking in, and one that could set waypoints along the way. So something even as simple as Google Maps works. I use that first. Excuse me. But there are some that are a little bit more attuned to tracking GPS as you're walking. And I found that this one here, GPS and Maps Toolkit, worked a little bit better for me than Google Maps. But there are dozens of apps out there that you can choose from. So you'll settle on your tree. You'll have your phone with that app on it. And looking at the Chicago Region Tree Initiative Witness Tree Map, when you button on one of the trees, if you select one, it will give you the GPS coordinates of that tree. You just pin those into your app on your phone as the location that you want to be aiming for. And then you go on out there and stomp around, and stomp is the right word. A lot of these trees at the time they were found were probably in a bit of a clearer area, but that doesn't mean that they are going to be that way now. So it might require some walking through some brambles and underbrush. Definitely wear a nice pair of long pants and long sleeves, and your mosquito and tick spray, if you're going in the summer. It may actually be easier to locate a tree in the winter when a lot of the underbrush is down and it's easier to walk. So my experience when I did this, to give you an idea of how it'll be for you if you decide you're going to go and look for one of these witness trees. I knew that since I work for the Forest Preserve District, I wanted to find a tree, a witness tree, that was in one of our forest preserves. I happen to live in Batavia, so I kind of zeroed in after looking at the Chicago Region Tree Initiative map at a preserve not too far from my home in Dick Young Forest Preserve. And I saw when I looked at Dick Young, this is the map within the CRTI website, bearing tree map. I saw that there were 4 witness trees that were supposedly in Dick Young, and you can see them here. 3 of them are brown, which means they're oak. And one of them is a greenish blue. It was supposedly a hickory. So, and they're grouped in 2s. I thought I would try to find the 2 that are a little bit lower, a little south of the top 2, because it looked like they were pretty close to a trail. And I didn't think it would be as difficult to get to them. So that's where I decided to aim. I went, I looked at the detail because when you click on any individual point in the witness tree map online, you can see what the tree class was. Like I said, that brown one was an oak. You can see how large it was in the 1800s. At that time, this oak was 20 inches in diameter, and the surveyors had identified it as a bur oak. So they tried to get down to species when they were doing the surveys. And the modern day scientists found that that tree that the surveyors found back in the 1800s was at these coordinates. So those are the coordinates that I plugged into my GPS, and I headed out. So I headed out to that bearing, and I found what I thought was the witness tree. When you go out, these are the things that you'll want to do when you get to what you think is the tree that you're trying to confirm is still there and see what shape it's in. So when you first get to the tree, when you get within about 15 feet of those coordinates, because they're accurate to about that point, first thing you want to do is see, is the tree still here? It won't always be. As I said, they have the Chicago Region Tree Initiative hasn't confirmed that all the trees are there. They've just mapped them based on the surveyor's notes. So is it there? If it is, great. Is it the right species? Is it the same species that surveyor in the 1820s thought it was? If not, make a note. If you're good at tree identification, put down what you know it is, not what they called it. If it's a few feet away from the GPS coordinates that the Chicago Region Tree Initiative had, go ahead and use your app to make a note of exactly what GPS coordinates that tree is standing at. Look at the condition of the tree. These are old trees, right? If the tree was alive in 1820, it's going to be 180, at least 180 years old, probably older, probably in the early, in the low 200s. So it's old. It's going to show some signs of wear. It may be dying. Make a note of that. How does it look? Because you'll be able to enter this data into the database when you get back to home. And then I mentioned that a lot of the surveyors put blaze marks on the trees. They use their axe and they made a mark towards the base of the tree. You'll be able to see those sometimes. This is a real potential blaze mark. This was submitted by my friend Mike Olivero, who found a witness tree on his own property with what looks like a blaze mark there. So that's kind of how the X mark grows out as the tree develops. You've got your phone with you, so take a couple photos. When you go and enter your data at the Witness Tree website, you'll be able to download some photos. So take a picture of the whole tree if you can, just the panoramic effect showing the crown. If you can take a couple pictures maybe of the bark and some of the leaves for species identification, that would be great too. And you want to determine, remember the database showed what the diameter of the tree was. To get that, you actually need to first measure the circumference of the tree and do a little calculation. And I have, let's see if I can get to this video to play. If I can, I will. If not, we'll skip it. Okay, let's see if this works. Here's a video of how to determine the diameter of the tree from using a tape measure to measure the circumference. So.
I don't think we're hearing it, Barb, or at least I'm not on my end.
No? Okay.
Darn it.
I can hear it on my end. Can you see it and not hear it?
I could see a little like thumbnail version of it.
Okay. No, we'll skip that and I will just verbally tell you what to do. So the other tool that you'll want with you, aside from your phone when you're out, is a tape measure. So you want to measure, you want to take the circumference, which is the length around the outside of the tree, 4.5 feet up from the ground level. So you use your tape measure, you measure 4.5 feet up, and then at that height, you use your tape measure and go around the whole trunk of the tree, and you get the circumference. So, and then you just need to do a very quick calculation, circumference divided by pi, which is 3.14, blah, 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 blah. You can Google that, is going to give you the diameter of the tree. Okay, so when you're out in the field, just make a note of the circumference. If you've got your phone, most of them have a calculator, you can calculate it there. Otherwise, you just take that circumference reading home and do the calculation at home. So once you get home then, you return to that the witness tree map. at the Chicago Region Tree Initiative, and you can enter your own data. You can update that record with, with real information. A lot of them are not going to have anyone having looked at the tree yet. So you go back to your tree and then enter the data that you found. So this is what the rest of the record looks like. Before going out, I had seen that it was an oak. This is a different tree. I just pulled one up at random. So what you'll want to enter then is the tree status, and you'll get a pick list there. It'll either say evaluate it, not evaluate it, or not sure. You just choose one. And then you enter the species, if you found it was different. I didn't. The diameter, which you're going to calculate from your circumference. Land use, that's going to be agriculture, forest, that's a pick list as well. Tree is located on is going to be either public property or private. And then location description is really whatever you want. It's an open field, as is observation notes. That's where you might want to put in the actual GPS coordinates and the condition of the tree. Put your name as the observer and your email and your phone. And then at the bottom, if you took any pictures, you can browse, and just, upload your pictures here that you took of that tree. It's pretty simple. So what I have, just to give you an idea of what it'll look like when you're done, for my bur oak, I entered that the tree was still present. It was indeed Quercus macrocarpa, which is bur oak. It was in woodland on public land. The actual coordinates were a little off from what they had thought, but not much. And it was just a few yards from another witness tree. My name and my credentials, and then I did put a couple of pictures in there. So the pictures I took were of the tree itself. This was a gigantic bur oak, just a beautiful specimen that saw a lot in its life, and a close-up of the leaves to see that it was a bur oak and not another species of oak. I did not, though. My first time out, I didn't bring a tape measure. It was not a perfect visit. This is not about perfection. This is about having fun, getting out, exploring and finding interesting things in nature, and trying to do a little bit of citizen science as you go, and then you'll get better each time. If you go out and look at a second tree, you'll remember everything. So my second time out, I went with a friend, and that certainly helped. This time I went with my friend Sue Steyer, and we tried to find a witness tree that was located in the Fabian Forest Preserve in Geneva. This tree, there's a whole bunch of bur oaks, again, oaks that were supposedly in Fabian. And this time we went out, we found that tree, and together we had our tape measure, and it was easy for two people to use it. We measured the circumference. So this is interesting. This bur oak was 12 inches in diameter in the 1800s. When we measured it, it was 46 inches in diameter. So this is a well over 200-year-old tree, and it had grown a lot, from the 1820s to 2020. So you might think as you're out there, I've got to find a gigantic tree. If you're looking for a witness tree, it's not always the case. Bigger in trees is not necessarily older. So don't set your sights too high. Don't rule out maybe a medium-sized tree that's at the coordinates that you're looking for, because not all tree or tree species grow at the same rate. Some of medium-sized trees could be very, very old, so keep an open mind. Different tree species grow at different rates everywhere. In Kane County, this will give you a bit of an idea of which trees grow the fastest. Scientists have measured, hundreds of trees and come up with growth factors that are representative to show you which trees grow the fastest. And I also included a little column here as to which trees live the longest, just for a little added info. So you can see that the higher the growth factor, the lower or the slower the tree grows. So an ironwood, for instance, you can see 7.0, it's a very slow growing tree, whereas up top, a basswood tree or a cottonwood Cottonwood is really, really fast growing. It's one of the fastest growing trees in Kane County. It has a much smaller growth factor. Okay, so you can, like, if you're interested, if you see a tree out there and you are wondering, like, what about that bur oak that I found, that witness tree? How old was that tree? You can't tell just by looking at it, but you can calculate it in a couple of different ways. The first way to calculate a tree age would actually be to cut the tree down and take a slice of it and count the tree rings, because a tree puts on one ring for each year of growth. But that would kill the tree. It's a very invasive method, and we don't really want to do that with these witness trees. The second way, less invasive, but it requires a special tool, a boring tool called a corer. And you drill this in and you take out a very thin little sample. And that sample is like a long core. If you pull it out, you can count the growth rings in that core as well. So that's a possibility. But a really non-invasive way, using the tool that you've already taken to measure your tree, just a tape measurer, you can calculate the age of a tree. So first off, to calculate the age of the tree, you you measure the circumference, just like you do for calculating the diameter, and then you find the diameter. And if you find this online, the diameter times that growth factor. So let's go back there real quick. So if in the case of my bur oak, I found that the diameter was about 46. 46 times 5 would give me the age of my tree. Right, so you can do that with any species that you find of any size and give you a good ballpark as to how old that tree is if you're curious. That is not information that you enter in the witness tree database, but it's just fun to know. A lot of people are interested in that. So what's so great? What's this witness tree research data used for? Well, witness trees data can be used to chronicle climate change, as I mentioned quickly. There's actually a famous witness tree in Harvard, and it's been the subject of many, many studies, and a book has been written about it. And that tree has been studied for the last 50 years intensely. And we know what changes. It has sensors that have been attached to the tree. It has phenology data, which is journals of when the tree has budded out over those past 50 years. So that we've been able to gauge how the tree has responded to climate change in the past and to predict what's going to happen to it in the future. So the book has been written about that tree, Seasons of Change with a Century-Old Oak. There is a webcam on the tree that you can go and check out at any point. And the data that comes off of all the sensors placed around the tree automatically make posts to Twitter and Facebook. This is the most famous plant with the most followers on Twitter and Facebook. So witness trees can really help us shape the future, as well as they're just really cool to find, and it's interesting to go for a walk in the woods. If you're interested in doing more tree citizen science, if you get really into finding witness trees and you're having a great time and want to do more, there's other things you can do around the topic of big trees. Illinois has what's called a big tree register. And this is a database of the largest trees of every species identified in the state of Illinois. And it's managed by the University of Illinois. You can find it online, and you can participate in this too, where if you have, let's say you have a gigantic silver maple in your yard and you think, my tree is gigantic, it's gotta be the biggest in the state. You can go onto this database and see what is the largest silver maple in the state, and you can measure your tree, and if it's bigger, you can nominate it. You can submit your nomination for the tree online. And then you can also just explore, looking at the map. Well, look, there's a tree not too far from me. I wonder what that is. You can just, take a little glance at it and find out where it is, what species it is. So for instance, here's a tree. This is a sugar maple tree, Acer saccharinum, and it is in St. Charles. And the cool thing about this tree is that we found it. The Kane County Forest Preserve did. It's on it's in Leroy Oaks Forest Preserve. which is where I work. So we submitted this tree, and it is indeed the biggest sugar maple, silver maple. I said sugar, didn't I? Silver maple so far reported in the state of Illinois. We also have, if you want to get hyperlocal, the Kane County Forest Preserve also has a big tree program where we database and take nominations and award certificates for the largest trees of all native species found in Kane County. We have that database, and we train you. We have some free courses to train you how to be a certified big tree inspector so that you can learn how to, there's a couple of measures that go into nominating a tree, the crown spread, the height, and the diameter at breast height. So we train you how to take those measurements and to do some basic tree identification so you're confident as to what type of tree you're identifying. So we actually have a training for that coming up in February. If you're interested, you can go to the Kane County website and register for that. So that's it. Hopefully I explained to you what a witness tree is and how great they are and how they can help us understand history as well as control some of the future issues that our planet faces with climate change. And it's just really fun to go out and look for them. So happy to answer any questions that you might have. And thanks for appreciating witness trees with me tonight.
Thank you so much, Barb. Wow, that was so interesting.
That's fun.
Yeah, that's so cool to look at. There's a ton in Aurora.
Yes, because Aurora's on the Fox River, right? So along the river corridors, there was quite a bit of forested land.
Yeah, and there's some near my house. I feel like I need to get out there tomorrow.
Yeah.
That's great. That seems like such a great activity for our new pandemic reality.
Yes, you can do it in small groups, social distancing with masks.
Outside, yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Outside is best, yeah.
Right. Well, thank you. We'll see if we have any questions coming through. We don't have any yet. Let me just check over on Facebook here. I'll just give another couple of minutes to see if anyone wants to type anything in, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. That's fine too. But again, I just want to thank you. That was so great.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. We're always happy to host the Forest Preserve. You guys have such great, interesting programs.
Oh, well, thanks. All right.
Mary,
well,
thank you. So let's go ahead and end it there.
Okay.
So thank you again. This was so wonderful and interesting. Yeah. I can't wait to get started.
Well, let me know if you find one, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the flesh, and hopefully not too long.
Yes, I hope so too. All right, thanks again.
Okay, good night, Colleen.